Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us in the SEPC Virtual Garden for our second SEPC University Education session of the day, The Power of Produce 2021. This live stream video session is sponsored by Onions 52 and Sabraco International. As you can see, I have joining me this morning David Sherrod, President and CEO of the Southeast Produce Council. David, how do you feel Southern Exposure is going so far?
It's going great, Fallon. I'll tell you, we already got started with the Rise of Produce 2021, and we're glad to be here. We had a great day yesterday at the golf course, celebrating our founder, one of our founders, Tom Page, at the Tom Page golf tournament, and that went really well. But this morning, you know, it's where the rubber meets the road. We got our education session. It's one of our most important platforms is education. So we're getting that started today. I want to send a shout out to my friend Rick Stein. He's not able to join us today, but Rick does have a recorded message today, and he'll be giving that. But he knows that we're in good hands with Anna Marie. Anna Marie is our data guru, and our Jedi Knights are going to be on stage today. So all of this is going to be a really good time, and we're just ready to get started and get this expo going.
Absolutely. And thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We're all glad to be here. And stay tuned as we prepare ourselves for the unveiling of the Power of Produce 2021.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today for Power of Produce 2021, partnered with FMI here. I'm going to take just a second to thank our sponsors. Today we have Bay Baby Produce, Classic Salads, Kings River Packing, Pure Flavor, Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Williamson Produce, as well as our education session refreshment area sponsors, ACO Farms, Fowler Farms, Fresh Innovations California, National Mango Board, Tasty Fruity International, Woodbridge Sales and Marketing, and WP Produce. We also wanted to take a second to reference our antitrust reminder. As always, when you're having conversations, as we look at education sessions, we're keeping this top of mind. So please take a second to read through this. So those of you who are familiar with Power of Produce and attended the sessions over the past couple years know that typically we have Rick Stein, the VP of Fresh for FMI, as our moderator. Unfortunately, he was unable to join us today, so we actually have him here on video to virtually welcome us and introduce Anna Marie.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here with you virtually and introduce Anne-Marie and the Power of Produce 2021. My hat's off to the entire SEPC team. David and all his group have really worked hard to put together this event. And I think that I'm very hopeful that this in-person and hybrid virtual event will be very successful. I know how many people have waited for in-person events, and I'm really excited for it. I'm especially excited for all of you that are here today to be here for the Power of Produce. And I look forward to introducing Anne-Marie in just a couple seconds. Before I do want to talk a little bit about what's been going on in the supermarket industry and a little bit with what's been happening with produce. As you can see, the supermarket industry had a phenomenal year, and my hat's off to all the supermarket frontline heroes. Supermarkets stayed open the entire time in 2020, and I think it was a phenomenal year. If you look at produce sales, and Anne-Marie will cover this, produce sales had a great year, and vegetables specifically had an even stronger year. So I think she'll go into those numbers and why. I think it's also interesting to look at some of the different departments. You know, produce was 11.4%. And look at meat at 19.2. And I think that goes to the perishability of produce. You know, you can't freeze it. And Anne-Marie will talk about how that influenced how consumers were maybe going over to the frozen food aisle in order to store veg for a while, and she'll get into that in a few minutes. My themes, the things that I really took away from the pandemic, was the fact that people were cooking more at home. Because they were cooking more at home, they were clearly looking for convenience. And this whole idea of their health and well-being. And when I say health and well-being, I do mean both. When I think of health, I think of my personal medical health. And when I think of well-being, I really think of more of a psychological sense. So I think Anne-Marie will talk about that as well. I want to remind everyone, our Power of Produce is available at FMI. You can download the report, and it is rich in information, especially last year. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, I miss not being there with you, but I know you'll do a great job with our panelists who are super. And I want everyone to have a great conference, and I wish you all success. Thanks so much, and have a great day.
All right. Well, don't know if you're listening in, Rick, but thank you for the introductions. Welcome, everybody. It's amazing to be back in person. And year 6 of the Power of Produce. So I know a lot of your faces, so you're probably fairly familiar with what the Power of Produce is, but let me back up for the newbies in the room. What we do every year is we try to understand and take a look at our world through the eyes of the shopper, because ultimately they're the ones who vote with their wallets. And so we ask them the in and outs of produce consumption, purchasing, 15 minutes long, anything we can think about. But we also know that what shoppers say and what they do isn't always the same thing. So we make sure that we overlay all that survey data with the IRI purchase data. So we really show both sides of the coin when we talk about things like value added, or are you actually eating more vegetables or organic and what have you. Now, none of this research could be made possible without the financial support of 3 fantastic organizations. Those are Euresic Label, Kristen represents them here, SEPC, as well as Burris Logistics. So thank you very much for continuing to make that possible for the whole industry on behalf of FMI, myself, and everybody who loves and enjoys this report. But more than anything, I always say this report is made by the industry for the industry. And what I mean by that is, yes, Rick and I sit together and we try to understand what we should be asking about, but more than anything, I always talk to people in the industry to see what it is that you need to find out, what you need to know. And my door is always open. Rick's door is always open. If you have a love for research, if you like to give us information on what we should be tracking, please reach out to either one of us at any time. So as Rick mentioned, the full report is just full of information, and it really covers that full path of purchase, if you will. Anything from consumption to how are you preparing it, where do you get your inspiration, how important are claims, all the way to the importance of packaging, functionality versus sustainability. That would be an awful lot to cover in today's session, because we want to make sure we hear lots from these guys here up at stage. So we're going to focus in on 4 different areas. Those, first of all, are performance. I know we've all been tracking that in the news in our own companies. We are, by the way, still doing those monthly reports as well. So if you're interested in those, shoot me an email anytime. But the 3 big topics from the Power of Produce this year we're going to look at are cooking and preparation, as Rick mentioned, healthy living, and really having a deep dive into e-commerce, because that probably was one of the biggest changes of all. After each of these sessions, we have the pleasure of an expert reactor panel. So I'm going to take a quick couple of minutes to introduce these guys to you. Right here next to me is Mike Roberts. He started in the grocery industry as a little bit of a side gig while going to college. Loved the people, loved the industry, never left it. He's been with Harps for 25 years, I believe. Now the, Director of Produce Operations. He's a Step Up program graduate. Mike, thanks for joining us today. In the middle, we have Gary Baker. He's the Senior Director of Fresh at Merchants Distributors, not only overseeing produce, but also meat, deli, bakery. So feel free to wear all those hats today, because I think winning in today's environment is winning together. He's worked with Kmart, Winn-Dixie, Food Lion, and is an avid Charlotte Panthers fan. All the way on the end there is Price Mabry. He also started in the grocery industry at a young age with United Supermarkets, following in his father's footsteps. Today, he is the Director of Produce and Floral at Homeland. It's 80 stores in various states, and that includes the banner that he started at, which is United Supermarkets. He's worked with AWG and Albertsons. So long story short, we got amazing expertise and amazing knowledge here on stage, and I look forward to hearing your insights. So let's get going. Let's have a look at performance. We're going to pace through that one pretty quickly because I think we've all been looking at it, but it never hurts to take a walk down memory lane. So let's have a look. Needless to say, if we look all the way back to 2016 till last year, that spike was enormous and we all felt it, certainly in the hours we worked and the craziness that was happening in the store. But while some of the trends and certainly the spikes were new, at the same time, we also had some trends that were the same. One of those trends was the fact that vegetables has been outgrowing fruit for many years. As you can tell, that started in 2017. But all in all, produce reached $70 billion in the channels that IRI measured. It's 22.5% of the perimeter sales, so all things meat, seafood, what have you. And it fell just a little bit below the overall perimeter sales that was up 12.2%. One of the reasons for that was because, as Rick mentioned, in produce you have more options when it comes to fruit and vegetables. You can go frozen, you can go canned, and that's exactly what happened, especially early on in the pandemic. We saw an enormous spike of all things canned, and also people flocked to the frozen aisles like they had never done before, and that percentage actually stayed up very high. As you can see, the blue at the very, very top. Even though it's a very small percentage, people today continue to buy more frozen fruit and vegetables than they have been doing. And that's something that we need to address. Because when you talk to people, why are you buying frozen versus fresh? It's always things like, well, I'm in the store a little bit less often and I need to stretch all my meals until I'm in the store next. So it's the shelf life. But people also say it's easier to buy online. People think it's a little bit cheaper. It's more convenient. So these are all things that I think are very important for us to address in our stores to educate people that, hey, there's a way to shop for shelf life in our fresh departments as well. And I think some areas do that really well. We often see examples of that in the banana category where we educate people about the green versus the yellow, how many days until it's ripe. Avocados have been really strong in that. The photo you see there were some items that I was given in my Walmart pickup order, and it was from Avocados Mexico, teaching me how to ripen avocados at home. My question is, how can we expand that? How can we make sure that people can buy fruits and vegetables for the entire week, stack them up, and make it all the way to the next trip? So digging a little bit deeper, looking at this past year, 2020, you see that in terms of dollars, units, and volume, all three are almost identical, and that's very different from what we saw in meat, where we had large inflation and many other categories as well. So the interesting thing is there certainly was some inflation, deflation within fruit and vegetables. If we think about corn and the price of corn last summer, but all in all, what was inflated and deflated kind of canceled each other out, and that's how we saw kind of all moving at the same time. March was an insane month, as we all know. Those week endings, March 15 and March 22, were the largest we have ever seen in the grocery industry. And those are what we're lapping right about now. And of course, that makes it extremely difficult on our comp sales. But I absolutely believe that there are still pockets of growth possible, and there's many trends that will continue to drive growth. And we're going to talk a lot about those a lot today. In terms of the share, what you see is that there were two areas within the fresh departments that really grew share in 2020, and that was seafood. Seafood started when the meat supply was very tight, and that's something I think we all need to be aware of, because we all tend to have items that we tend to pair. If we buy beef, we might buy mushrooms and broccoli, what have you. A lot of people are new seafood shoppers. So giving them some tips on what goes well with seafood might be a great way to start pushing some different items that you're not necessarily selling today. On the other hand, we saw huge growth in meat. As Rick mentioned, the main reason behind that was the big inflation that we saw in meat, because of course, we had all that tightness in supply. And where meat customers were told, hey, you can only buy one package or two packages, we had to sign up that says no limits on produce supply. So one of the main differences there was inflation, but nevertheless, there's opportunities there to continue to push all the fresh departments hand in hand as people are looking for solutions more than ever. Now, this to me is one of the most important slides. So if you print out your deck at home, put a big O exclamation point on this one, because this really shows us how the sales were derived. First of all, we did really well in household penetration. Even though there were more people that bought frozen and canned, we still basically kept our household penetration extremely high at 99.3%. What does that mean? 99% of households buy at least some fresh fruit or vegetables during the year. So finding that 0.37% that isn't, that's a useless exercise. But when you go one step down and you look at the individual categories, people who buy oranges, people who buy potatoes, people who buy onions, that's really where we still have a lot of opportunity to grow household penetration. And that's really where my comments come in on seafood and what have you. Like, what are some different ways in which we can push new fruits and vegetables onto people's plates? Trips is a really interesting one because, as you'll see later on, is overall we had a lot of trip pressure in the stores. People were really trying their best not to be in the store as often and really combine all what they needed into one trip, one store. But as you can see here, produce trips were actually up. So the conclusion of that is fewer trips overall, more produce trips, so we did better on conversion. And if we want to win in 2021 and beyond, we've got to continue to do really, really well on conversion and make sure that every person who comes into our store, even if it's just for a gallon of milk, still makes it to the produce department to buy at least a few items to hold them over for the rest of the week. Spending per trip is another one that was very interesting because, again, we didn't have all that much inflation in certain categories, yes, but overall, no. And yet we had a 6.8% increase in what people were spending. So that goes directly back to people actually did buy more fruits and vegetables, as we'll see in a second. All that resulted in the spend per buyer increasing by about 11%. To a total of $664 on an annual basis. So I think I talked about we've got to really do a good job at making sure that when people are in store, they pick up produce. Realistically, there's going to be some people who just run in and out the store and are only there for their gallon of milk, and they are not coming to the produce department. So I think winning in the current environment is really all about working together. Cross-merchandising stations. It's taco night in Pittsburgh with all the fruits and vegetables, the tacos, the meat that you need for this particular meal. Also, if you look at the other one, because I realize cross-merchandising, that's a lot of labor, that's a lot of work. Here is a company that did it virtually. They're a little bison company, and they put up signage anywhere that you can imagine starting a burger journey with bison. So they hung a little bison sign in the marinades. Here you see it in the condiments, things like mustard. Here you see them having a little signage in the bread aisle, because if you buy burger buns, then you might think about bison burgers as well. Or even cheese. If you buy some sliced cheese, why not have a cheeseburger? So these are, in a way, much easier ways to cross-merchandise. Now, I realize a lot of retailers have clean aisle policies that go directly against this type of signage. But again, we are going up against record spikes that we have never seen before. And I think creativity like this is enormously important. Talking about creativity, I think we're all ready for some fun. And I really love this display, beautiful display of all the items for St. Patrick's Day. Now, you've seen, I've seen this before, it's nice, but The beautiful thing about this one is it was not in March, it was actually in September. This retailer figured out how to effectively double all the holidays in a year, and they said, hey, if you missed out on St. Patty's Day in 2020 because of the pandemic, or you're just excited that St. Patrick's Day is 6 months away, we're calling a redo. So imagine the power of that. If you think about Christmas in July, any kind of holiday that you just decide to celebrate a random day of the week. And here's another one that is absolute creativity. It's called the Adult Lunchables. It's a steak, a beer, and a potato. What's not to love? So winning with the holidays, I think, is another huge one. Holidays like Valentine's Day, Mother's Day were ones that traditionally a lot of the dollars were spent in the food service channel. And of course, the last 2 years, we've actually seen a lot of those dollars go to retail, and that's something that we all need to strive for, to continue to keep those dollars, even though without a doubt there's a lot of pent-up demand for eating out as well. And just having some fun with the visual beauty of fruits and vegetables like no other category can, I think is a great way to win with the holidays. Looking a quick little bit even deeper yet, looking at dollars, units, and volume, you see that that whole idea of vegetables outpacing fruit is just true regardless of the measure that we're looking at. It's also interesting to see that vegetables sit in the double digits, big time in all those measures, but also volume is outpacing units. So what we're seeing is people moved to a little bit larger package sizes, whereas in fruit, you actually see the opposite. You see units outgrowing volume, so people were actually buying smaller package sizes there. Last but not least, the pandemic powerhouses. This is always one of my favorite slides. What we did here is not look at the percentage growth, but look at the actual dollars that were added in 2020, ranked by the greatest number of dollars to the least in the top 10. So the reason why you see 3 of them highlighted in green is because they were unusual suspects on this top 10 list. Why is that? Go all the way over to your right side column and you'll see that they are fairly small categories. They are oranges, cherries, and mushrooms. And I think we can learn a lot from that. Mushrooms had a giant year because beef had a giant year. So think about the fact that all the other cross-merchandising and ideas that you can give, and as a result, drive mushrooms or other categories to new heights. Oranges, Pamela and I talked a lot about that on our podcast. Oranges, citrus was all associated with immune building. And immune building is still a huge factor in how people decide what they're going to cook and eat today. Cherries, of course, they did come off a weak 2019, but still to me that really speaks to something fun, something different. We're tired of the same old fruits, and cherries really bring that fun and different item. So guys, I've talked enough for a little while. What I actually wanted to start to do before we look at some of the numbers we talked about is I cannot even imagine being in your shoes during the pandemic. You must have come away with a million lessons. We probably could make the entire session about the lessons, but if you just had to share a couple, whether it's for you personally, for the company, for the industry, let's just go down the line. Mike, what would some of those lessons be?
The first thing I learned is to say I don't know a lot. That early on I didn't know. I mean, nobody knew. So I've always prided myself on knowing what's going on, and I didn't know. So I had to learn to kind of humble myself. I don't know what we're going to do right away. After that is having a backup plan for everything. And that's what, we might not have had that then. We do now. And that goes from even staff at the store. Sometimes during the height of the pandemic, we didn't have trained produce, team member in the store. So we've gone to work on cross-training associates for different departments. And then as well, having backup plans as far as, secondary suppliers, building routes to, looking down and forward. If it's something were to happen again, we're much more prepared now. But that's going from I don't know to now maybe I do know.
Yeah, awesome. Gary, how about you?
I would definitely say number one factor for me would be just the communication with all parties. If you go back and look at the beginning, everyone was pretty much panicking on loss of product or the hardships on attaining product. So to have the open communication to your retailers or your customers on different pack sizes or different things they could do if this item is completely gone. And then just the food service, who overnight lost business. They didn't know where to send the product to. So having a already aligned communication line with them to see what we could do to help them move product through the system. So definitely one of the insights for me would be the communication across all parties.
Awesome. How about you, Price?
Yeah, for us, it was really being nimble, being able to react fast. Like Gary said, we leaned on food service. Overnight, that business was gone. Looking forward, it's all about putting those steps in place, alternate sourcing. What happens when facilities reach capacity? How do we move those orders off to a regional partner, to a food service partner? And the real takeaway is how do we make it seamless for the produce manager?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's stick with you for a minute, Price. So you saw really since 2017, but it accelerated during the pandemic where vegetables outgrew fruit Do you have any insights as to A, why that is, and B, what can we do as an industry altogether to grow fresh fruit at the same rate, if not higher, than vegetables?
Sure. You know, for me, it's recipes, right? So vegetables and ingredient. You know, folks are going into stores, it's on their shopping list, they're building a meal. You know, the meat folks have done this for years. You look at an ad and you have a hamburger, or you have ground beef in the ad. What do you see? A picture of a hamburger, right? Fruit, you know, the fruit suppliers need to do the same thing. We're coming up on soft fruit. How do we do that with peaches? How do we do it with plums? How do we do it with pluots? How do we use those fun, high flavor items as part of a recipe?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Gary, really throughout what we saw was there were the big powerhouses like berries and bagged salads, and you would expect them to be there because they're so big that even a small percentage gain is going to give them a lot of absolute dollar growth. But then there were some unexpected ones. How do you think we should go about, like, what's going to be our next big powerhouse? What can we do to help drive these big gains in 2021?
I think, first of all, first thing you need to look at, that there was a fundamental change in consumer behavior almost overnight. The in-home preparation averaged, as far as meal preparation, went from 48% to about 84%. So just imagine the huge influx of customers at home now preparing meals. So definitely that was specifically overall insight that we've learned there, but specifically to the oranges, the mushrooms, and also the cherries that we touched on bases earlier, or that the mushrooms, you know, we no longer have that in food service. So that some of that transition back into the home as far as meals preparation. And oranges have always been an item that you could stock up with and have a long-lasting health item at home to consume. And again, the new item, cherries. I mean, that to me, that was new. So definitely, those are lessons that I took away as far as the increase for those particular items and categories.
Have any guesses on what's going to be the next hot item, or too early to tell?
I wouldn't say it's too early to tell. I just think we have to just keep a close eye and watch on it, just to see what we can move and look at and make sure that we're tagging along with that.
Yeah, agreed. Talking about tagging along with that, we did see some dollars flow into both frozen and canned, and frozen seems to be holding on to that increased share. 62% of people are saying, you know what, I kind of like buying frozen fruits and vegetables, I'm going to stick with it. They talked about it's more convenience, it's easier to buy online. Some people think it's cheaper, the shelf life. How do we fight against that, or do we? Can they go hand in hand?
You know, produce is really the one department in the store where you can buy with all your senses. You know, you can touch it, you can smell it, you can see it. You know, maybe one day we can get back to letting you taste it too. But you know, so with having those advantages over a center store department like that, I think we have to just get back to you know what we were doing more pre-pandemic, and that was, you know, show off the great products that we have, because we have that sense, that impulse. You know, with all the different senses that you use to shop in the produce department. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just getting back to being who we were before pre-pandemic. I know in our company right now, we're working on building more displays again, because we got really good at just filling up spots in the department. So we're trying to get more creative again. And I think, you know, to Price's point with recipes and with, you know, giving the consumer meal ideas that are quick and fresh in the produce department with value-added items, either whether it's in-house or some of the great products that are offered out there. I think that's how we take some back of the frozen aisle, I think.
Yeah, I agree. You know, years ago, I was doing a speech up in Spokane, and we were talking about organic and value-added and everything else, and this lady rose her hand and she goes, you know what, that's all fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, people's eyes decide, and produce is bought with the eyes, and I think that's absolutely still true today. And but that's also something we need to address in online, and we'll definitely talk about that a little bit later on. So let's have a look at consumption and preparation. As Rick called out, that was really one of the areas that I think most profoundly changed in 2020. For years as an industry, we've been trying to push increased consumption through coupons, through ideas, through influencers, any which way we could think about it. And then the pandemic rolled around, and we saw consumption rise to all-time highs. And yet there is still a lot of opportunity, I would say, to increase consumption. We talked earlier about increasing household penetration at the category level, not as a department level. But as you can see here, there is still room for growth in consumption occasions. 44% of Americans only eat fresh fruit and vegetables up to about 3 days a week. That means only 57% eats it 4 or more days a week, and that is down from what it was before, and probably because in part more frozen and canned is rotated in, but also the whole idea of figuring out what consumption occasions can we use to drive more fruit and vegetable consumption to make sure that the spikes here on the right side of your screen are as high as they can possibly be. So we asked about that, and we figured out, did you buy more fresh fruit and vegetables during the pandemic? And if so, what consumption occasion drove that? All in all, 40% said, I'm buying more fruit, about 30% more vegetables. If we combine that, it boiled down to 32% of the population saying, I am buying more fresh produce today than I did prior to the pandemic. What's really interesting is if we split it out by fruit and vegetables by consumption occasion, you'll not be surprised to see that dinner drove a lot of those extra vegetable dollars, but also lunch. And one of the questions we asked in the survey this year was, are you now working from home? Are your kids in virtual education? And if you look behind those numbers, you just see that impact of the pandemic, social living trends, working trends on these numbers. So really this comes down to the area of the country that you're in. I'm in Florida. Most of the kids are back in school. In other areas of the country, there's still 50% of the nation's kids that are still in school. Are you solving for those lunch occasions at home? People have a little bit more time for breakfast. Are you solving for those? On the fruit side, you see that snacking is really, really big. If you talk to the nation's parents, they always talk about how the kids are growing up in a snackified culture and that they really want those snacks to be as healthy as they can be. Center store certainly jumps on that. I mean, if you buy any box of snacks in the store, it is full of claims on all sorts of different things, lower sugar, low fat, low calorie, no health, no gluten-free, etc. But I think snacking, both on the fruit and vegetable side, can be a huge opportunity still. If you joined us in December for the virtual garden, you probably saw a lot of these pictures. We really talked a lot about the different occasions, so go back and find that deck. But here you see some integration of people, different retailers bringing up different meal occasions directly in the store. So things like having your berries with breakfast, a pumpkin pie baking kit. Baking was off the charts in 2020. For a long time, the baking aisle was up more than 100% over a year ago. There was no eggs, no yeast, no flour, no nothing to be found, and baking continues to be something that people do a lot. And then, of course, healthy snacks as well. What is helping to integrate produce more often? We also asked our consumers about that. Well, of course, they always bring up price and promotions. They always do. But that spike is considerably higher than all the others that are sitting right around about 30%. So things like recipes that Price talked about is very important. The fact that they want meal variety. I did a speech on meat a few weeks ago, and I talked about variety as our superpower, and that is true for vegetables and fruit as much as it is for meat. We all get tired of eating the same old, and if we can bring variety to people's kitchens, we win. So just like in meat, variety is our superpower. But looking in that number of price and promotion a little bit more, in a way, people are not incorrect in that. We saw a lot less being sold on merchandising in 2020. In part, we didn't know what we could put on advertising. In part, we had no clue what was in the warehouses. Some retailers got rid of the circular for a couple of weeks, a month. It's smaller. But all in all, typically, we have about 44% of dollars and volume that is sold on some kind of promotion. So it might have been an in-store display, it might have been a price reduction, it might have been something in the ad. That is way down, especially on the vegetable side, to about 25% of dollars and about 34% of fruit. So a lot less sold on promotion, and I think this is one of the areas that we're gonna have to take a hard look at, not only from Mike's eye-catching displays, but also in order to prompt that impulse purchase and go back to what produce was always known for. Also, though, keeping in mind, where are the dollars incremental versus where are you subsidizing a purchase that would happen anyway? Another change that we saw a lot was a change in preparation. People figured out on their own that variety is their best friend, and they figured out, well, you know, if I make it with different spices, or I make a different fruit or vegetables, or all these different ways that are noted here in the chart, you see that people in themselves also flock to variety. And the more that we as an industry can help them in creating new items and bringing some fun new stuff to the table, the better. And the closer that intersection is, the better. Here you see where people get inspiration. In a typical year, the number that is extremely high on this chart is items that I know how to prepare and tend to prepare. That one was way down, totally speaking to this idea of, well, I no longer am all that interested in my golden go-tos, because by now they're not so golden anymore. But friends and family are a big one. And if you think about it, a lot of us were not able to visit our family, be with our family on the holidays. So this whole idea of tradition and dishes that were big for the family growing up, that's one of the reasons why friends and family, as well as Facebook, are as big as they are. Cookbooks made a comeback. Social media in general made a huge comeback, and more so, of course, among the younger generations and all. But as you can see, there's a lot of inspiration out there. We're not necessarily on that list as grocery stores, and I think one of our goals for the next couple of years is let's try to be on this inspirational chart where people come to the store, they know what to cook for dinner because of our recipes and ideas. I think simply recognizing that you're tired of the same old, like HEB did here, or just having, have you tried series on social media with something different every single week? Or just saying, we understand that you're not in a mood to cook from scratch each and every day. So maybe something that's heat and eat, ready to cook, ready to eat, all those different options, I think, are winning options going forward. Value added, one of the guys here brought it up here in a minute. Value added, I think, initially didn't do well because anything that got prepared in the store, there wasn't labor for it, there weren't labor hours for it. But what you saw later on in the year is that value-added vegetables did extremely well, of course, mostly driven by prepackaged salads, but really anything that was microwavable, washed, chopped, halved, what have you, did extremely well. On the fruit side, though, as you can see, the numbers are mostly flat. One of the reasons behind that, when we talked to consumers, they said, well, oftentimes value-added fruit is more for entertaining, it's more for on the go. All those options have fallen away. But if you can see how well the numbers from IRI align with the survey numbers, here you're just seeing that value-added vegetables on the left of your screen, they won in two different ways. First of all, more people were buying them. That's that bar that goes down along the bottom. But those who were buying them a lot more often. We jumped all the way, as you can see, the combined blue and purple combined. That is a big increase in people who are buying value-added vegetables more often. And as you can see on the fruit side, we actually backtracked a little bit, and we certainly didn't gain in frequency either. So that is something to consider. You know, people are still gathering in smaller groups. Are you adjusting your offerings in value-added fruit to adjust of how people are living today? In terms of predictions, we're seeing that people do believe they're going to buy more value-added fruit and vegetables in 2021. So this whole idea of bring on the convenience, I'm calling 2021 the year of the shortcut. I think we're all a little bit tired of doing the chopping ourselves. But what you do see as well is that people that currently buy it a lot plan to buy even more. So it's really that core shopper that plans to buy even more. So guys, a lot of information to reflect back on. Mike, let's start with you over here. The whole idea of a lot less product on promotion. Where do you see that going? Do you think we can leverage promotions to push variety versus volume? What's your view on promotions?
Well, I mean, during the pandemic, I think we went 5 months without having a circular or having an ad. We just didn't need it. The customers I don't think were even looking for it. They were coming in, they were getting what they want, and they were leaving. And I think during that time, while trips may have been up, the average trip to the grocery store was under 30 minutes. So when we got back into it, into writing ads, we ended up, less items in the ad, in the circular each week, but we're doing more with BOGO sales, doing more with 1 day, 3 day sales, and then trying to engage the consumer more maybe in our app to give them different ways to save money. We do think people are going to be looking to save money this year. So I think finding new ways on the backside of the pandemic to engage the consumer is the trend that we're looking at to continue, we think.
Yeah. So adding on to that, so finding new ways, price, you mentioned providing recipes, etc. We saw that there is a gazillion ways in which people find inspiration for meals. Are you doing anything with social media to try and inspire people, and how do you do that in your company?
Yeah, so what we're doing, Anne Marie, is doing a lot with digital coupons. We're finding a lot of our vendor partners out there want to get out to the consumer in that way, and that's really the only piece we're playing in that platform.
Yeah. Are you thinking that down the road you're going to try and engage people more?
Absolutely.
Maybe tying it in with online shopping, or
Absolutely. We're a small company. We actually got a big Vidalia onion campaign coming. Countdown social media on that, and those are all avenues that we'll be pursuing moving forward.
Yeah. And Gary, how about you? We saw a huge strength in value-added vegetables. Fruit didn't do so well. What do you think is going to happen with value-added in that whole space of helping people save time while paying maybe a little bit more?
Well, I can say this about value added. For us, it has been something that's really true to my heart and definitely to my company, as far as being able to look at that trend and create in-store value-added sections. We've created a whole program surrounding it, where it's a complete how-to-do book on how to display it, how to cut fruits and vegetables, what trays to put them in, what to price them at, and it has really helped and also just really capitalize on that growth potential. But I do see, with there being still more cooks in the kitchen, that's everything is gravitating continually toward that. So for future, I don't see those cooks readily coming out of the kitchen. I still think that folks would continue to want to make some at-home meal preparations and really use that.
So do you think that as people are starting to move around more, maybe kids go back in school, do we think value-added fruit is going to make a comeback, or really the whole concept of on-the-go cups, etc.?
I would hope so, with them returning, getting out of the house and going back to school, and more of that grab-and-go occasion should arise to where it should help fruit category increase.
Yeah. Price, I want to hop back to you because we talked about a lot of different meal occasions. So let's just talk through a couple of those. Breakfast, that's not really something we've typically gone after. We just figure if people eat a granola bar on the go, maybe some cereal. How can we win with breakfast if it was the world according to Price?
Sure. So, for us, it's the cut fruit piece. Right when you walk in the store, having your parfaits, your watermelon bowls, pineapple bowls, cantaloupe bowls, are right there in an easy reach location. And then right beside it, you need your berries, right? I mean, folks it's an impulse item. You can't pantry load them. So those two go hand in hand in my book for breakfast.
Do you do anything about inspiration online or in the ad to pair the two, or it's really more of an in-store?
It's more of
effort?
an in-store experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, how about you? You get, let's see, lunch. How about lunch?
So I get the hardest question. That's the hardest meal, and really, I think Gary Baker with his recent promotion and across all departments might have some more insight in that than me. I think maybe.
I really appreciate that, Mike, but earlier today I was having a similar conversation with Price, and I thought he'd be the best man.
Oh man, this one wasn't on my notes.
All right, Mike, you're back in the hot seat.
I can speak to it a little bit. So I do think the lunch crowd is different now than it has been. It's not the same. It's not maybe the person on the go. It's maybe not the lunchbox. It may be a multitude of things now. So I think you have to look at that consumer across the whole department. There's still, the bowl salad consumer, the value-added veg and fruit consumer out there. But then also, lunch boxes maybe at home now. So I think you can look across the whole department at that lunch consumer, but I think you have to do it with signage. Midday munchie signage or meals in minutes or some things like that. I think that lunch crowd has changed so much that I think we have to really kind of go after it in a different way now. And it is a tough question. Lunch is hard for the produce department to win.
Yeah, it is. I actually did a lot of work with consumers, and consistently they kept saying lunch is all about speed. I'm not going to sit and cook something that takes a long time. It has to be quick and zappable or quick dump in a bowl, what have you. So we have more challenges with lunch, absolutely. So Gary, even though you got pawned off on lunch, let's do snacking. How's that?
Well, I would say snacking, definitely, if you think about it, 50% of all eating occasions can fall into the category of snacking. So anything that we can carry in store or have in a convenience set that's small, consumable snack size will help us grow in that category and win towards snacking.
Yeah. Any thoughts on people saying, well, I can buy the little fruit cups, but they go bad in a few days? How do you advise snacking to last a whole week?
Well, it's just you got to change up the snack. Maybe you don't always do fruit. Maybe you do something with vegetable or something that's combo. Definitely need to just change it up a little.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, that's a great segue into the next topic, which is that whole idea of healthy living. And the interesting thing there is that we often think as health as better for me. But the interesting thing is when you look at all the research, and whether that's produce or meat or what have you, this whole idea of better for me is part of a bigger movement. And that's the whole idea of better for me, better for the planet, better for the worker. So that whole idea of social responsibility, even better for the animal on some of the other sides. And what you're seeing is, especially in Europe and other countries that tend to be a little bit ahead of the United States in these areas, is that all four of these are very closely tied together. The photo there in the middle is a sign at Carrefour where you see them having a whole program where it says it's better for the farmer, the environment, the animal, and you. Or simply Nugget Market out in California having all the signage up of what they're doing in terms of donating to food banks, reducing waste, reducing water, and really tying it all together. A better you means a better whole world together, and that's what we're seeing going on in the mind of the consumer as well. A lot of stores are also starting to push more on this whole idea of food waste, which is an ever bigger and growing topic in the mind of the consumer. On your left, you're seeing a picture from Safeway Canada, which is not related to Safeway here, but in every single department simply points out to people how much money or how much poundage gets tossed out every single year, bringing it home to the individual. You also, of course, see a lot of different programs relative to ugly fruit, as we tend to call it here. This is a program in France in store where they just walk the departments and all the items that they don't want in the regular displays get put in these boxes, and it says always delicious, but not always as pretty. So this whole idea is definitely taking off around the world. In addition to, of course, a lot of push on packaging as well. Power of Produce asks a lot about the idea of functionality versus sustainability. Both are incredibly important. Of course, the idea of packaging speeds up a trip, and so we did see actual greater growth in everything packaged than we did in loose or pick-as-you-go items. We see a lot of emergence of cardboard in Europe, especially as you see here on the pictures, pointing out that they're trying to reduce plastic, compostable packages and trays, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that going forward as well. My clicker is not working. There we go. The other area that I'm starting to see grow, and you see a little bit in produce brands as well. I grabbed some examples here from the meat department. This whole idea of social responsibility, taking care of people who are in need, taking care and making sure that the farmer is paid a fair wage. In Germany, there's a whole program, pay 10 cents extra on the meat package, and that 10 cents goes directly back to the farmer. So this whole idea of social responsibility is becoming bigger, and again, that is all part of the greater definition of health. But this whole idea of better for me is definitely the biggest one of them all. In total, about 7 in 10 shoppers pay attention to making healthful choices in produce. put a lot of effort. That's about 3 in 10. And those same people, for the most part, also decided to look even more at healthy choices during the pandemic. So this whole idea of immunity, for instance, we saw emerge very, very big in the past year. But it's not just about immunity. You see that people actually have a ton of positive health associations that go beyond just, oh, we all know fruit and vegetables are healthy, but it's things like gut health and immunity and brain health and everything that we know as the industry. There is some knowledge of that, but I truly believe this is one of our biggest opportunities to educate beyond what I would call the overall health halo of fruit and vegetables. A lot of retailers already do that. There's some great programs out there. Produce for Better Health worked with Red Nurse in the purple sign there, talking a little bit about outside the store this was, what items have vitamin C, what items have vitamin D. I saw more vitamin C stations out in the marketplace this year than I've ever seen before, but keep that in mind as flu seasons in future years will roll around as well, and the fact that it's not just about oranges. A really interesting sign in a Carrefour in Oman, in the Middle East, that just had very hands-on tips. You may have to look at this at home, it might be too small, but it was things like being hydrated is very important. So drink water, but also eat water-rich fruits and vegetables like cucumbers. So very easy tips, very easy to apply, and imagine just the ability of rotating through very common sense and easy to apply tips like that in your store. Whether right or wrong, grocery shoppers very much associate organic with healthy eating. The first association of why do you buy organic is because people believe it is healthier. But there are also some other associations in terms of believing it's better for the environment, maybe no use of pesticides is better for me long term. But this whole idea of organic and health remains very much interwoven. We had a good year in organic. Initially, it paced behind a little bit. There was also some deflation, especially on the fruit side. But in all, there was double-digit sales both on the fruit and vegetable side. So that is an encouraging sign, certainly going forward, and really one of the only areas where fruit did end up in the double digits. So that's an interesting occurrence. At the same time, we did see a little bit of a backsliding in the number of people that bought organic versus prior years, and that's something to keep in mind. Whenever we have a lot of economic pressure, we tend to have people who more dip in and out of the organic fruit and vegetables category rather than always buy organic, and that's exactly what we see happening. The Bar and Brew shows about a third of organic shoppers tends to like to buy organic for anything and everything that they can find, but everybody else tends to more dip in and out, and that's depending on the item. Like maybe I want to buy organic bananas, but I don't care when I buy oranges. Or it is based on the fruit, based on the promotion. So there are still many different ways in which we can continue to engage people in organic. So guys, Gary, let's start with you. There's definitely been a big focus on health during the pandemic. We saw that play out in some of the merchandising. What are you doing just to play up that whole health halo of fruit and vegetables, generally speaking?
Well, for one, we know that the eating healthy focus is not going away. It's going to be here for a while and hopefully to stay. What we're doing to highlight the health halo of fresh fruits and vegetables are just making a renewed focus to make sure we're including recipes that focus on health in our ads and our ad formats, along with in-store signage when we build displays, some kind of place card that talks to the highlights and healthiness of that particular item being advertised or promoted. Also reaching out to our vendor community with whatever POS or information that they have that will help us continue to promote that. And we really, that's some of the things that we're doing, but we also do support programs like Produce for Kids. So definitely all those are what we're doing to highlight the health benefits.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And Mike, just to build onto that, and you've played your pass card, so this is all you. We talked about the overall health halo. We also talked there's many specific benefits that consumers already recognize. Do you think there is an opportunity in building onto those in our retail world?
Almost definitely. There's several different, there's different categories and different ways to do it. we use special signage in the stores to really to highlight items and the health benefits of them. And that's something we've done even before the pandemic, but we've continued to do. Some of the opportunities I see is with like the drink category, with people wanting to get healthy and quickly. And so you look at the immunity shots that have, really kind of taken off, and kombuchas, which just a few years ago, wasn't a really key word. So I think that those are some great opportunities, along with people moving to some packaging, more packaging items. Whether, you can sell a message on there about nutrition, and telling your consumers about that. And Gary stole my thunder on the Produce for Kids, because we use that one too, and that's a great way using their dietitians and the platform that they have in the stores. It's a great way to help your consumer.
I agree. Price, last one on this topic for you. So we saw that a lot of consumers equate organic with health and really all the other claims as well. What do you see happening in that area, and should we just make that about health, or how can we really sell that area for the hiring and education as well?
Right. Well, what we're going to do, Anne Marie, is create campaigns. We need health and wellness campaigns using, like Gary said, our vendor partners. We got an excellent POS out there. Create a destination. We got Earth Day coming up, third week of April. It's going to be a total store campaign for us, promoting health, organics as center focus. And then just to throw in, we like to hit, $1.99, $2.99, and focus all on vegetables, focus all on the fruit, and really just help educate not only the consumer, but the produce manager as well.
Makes a lot of sense. I will, I'm sure, get more questions on all of this from the audience as well. So let's look at our last topic here, channel choices. I mentioned earlier the total trips were down, but our trips were up, which meant we did much better in conversion. Here is that graphic. It's a little bit busy, but it's easy to understand once I talk you through it. So the line in green is the basket size, how many dollars that people spend per trip. And the line in blue is the number of trips they took and their indexes against the prior year. So what you're seeing is very early on, people were racing all around to fill their pantries, fridges, and freezers. After that, we went into shelter in place, and we've never really come back on the number of trips that people are taking this week or per week. But instead, people are spending a whole lot more money than they do on every single trip than they did in the past. If I had to be a betting gal, I would say we're not going to see a huge increase in trips anytime soon. People have now learned over the course of a year that they can shop less often and still make it through the week. So this whole idea of losing dollars to frozen, shelf life being their trump card, what can we do about that? Because I doubt that we're going to see a whole lot of people come back to the store at the rates that they were doing in the past. We saw a lot of shifting around of dollars. The two winning channels, I would say, in the pandemic were grocery and club. The main reason for that was because people wanted to combine all their grocery needs into one trip, one store. So this whole idea of I go to a specialty store for this or I go to a club for that, that didn't really happen. And so people combined all their needs, and the two that really benefited from that were the grocery and the club channel. And even though the shares increases are fairly small, if you think about the fact that we're talking about a $70 billion industry, even 0.5% is a lot of money and a lot of zeros that move from one channel to another. We have seen some of that slide back a little bit, but we continue to see additional strength in grocery and club even today. Of course, one of the biggest changes of all last year was that whole idea of shopping online. We had been seeing some increases in that, but nothing like we saw in 2020, where really we jumped forward 4 or 5 years on what was the growth trajectory of online growth. So whereas in 2019, we had about half, 47% of shoppers who had tried to buy anything online, that jumped up to almost 2/3 of people. We still had some trial. We still had people that did it once or twice. Maybe they were quarantined, or maybe they just wanted to see if it was for them. The trial number is fairly similar, but in addition to having more people buy online, the other huge change was the fact that they bought it much more frequently. Look at those bottom boxes where 9% is buying it every 2 weeks, 11% weekly, and that is double from what we saw in prior years. So it's more people, it's also the frequency. Whether or not this continue, we actually saw online being down in January and February, so we might actually see some folks flock back to the store. We might not see the aggressive growth that we were seeing, but certainly it's a huge change. It also really mattered as to who changed. Of course, the core millennial continues to really be that online shopper. But at the same time, we closed a lot of what I would call demographic gaps. So we never really had a whole lot of online engagement with boomers. Well, all of a sudden, because of safety concerns, they started buying online as well. Not to the proportion that millennials do, but we closed that gap a little bit. Online shopping was really happening along the two coasts and the bigger cities, and we saw rural areas and smaller towns come online as well. We saw, for instance, income that tended to be a very high income shopper, and all of a sudden really everybody was buying online. Again, whether or not this continues, it's hard to say. I think at some point we are going to see some plateauing, especially on the fresh side, because people do like to interact with our items. But all in all, I think we're going to see continued growth there. So we had very high online conversion as well. We saw people that were in the store buy in the store more often. We see that online as well. 85% of people who shopped online bought fresh fruit and vegetables online. That was a third enormous change, an enormous jump, because typically people started off with center store items, and then little by little, as they got more comfortable, they would start into meat and produce as well. That all went out the wayside, and people immediately started buying fresh fruits and vegetables as well. If you project that out to the total population, we're looking at about 54% that have bought fresh fruit and vegetables online. Not everybody had a great experience, but for the most part, 55% said, you know what I got would have been the same thing that I picked out. 19% said it actually was better, but we do have 26% who goes, I don't know, it wasn't as good. And those are probably the people that will eventually go back to buying in the store. So we asked people about some of their observations on what were their frustrations, because really that gives us a punching list on what to do. Some people talked about, well, it's really hard to estimate weight. I know to buy 3 bananas, but I have no clue how many pounds 3 bananas is or 1 onion is. So the whole idea of each pricing becomes more important. Others talked about, well, if I want items for dinner tonight versus I'm buying it for a few days from now, let me have the opportunity to actually choose it that way. Some people said it's very hard because it's hard to scroll, hard to figure out what are all your varieties. So figure out systems for that as well. Winning from the first click is incredibly important online. What we're seeing is in the store, and Mike, I think you mentioned impulse, especially on the fruit side. What we're seeing in the online basket is that it is much more stable. People buy the same items again and again. So that has huge implications for all the innovation that we're seeing in our category, all the seasonal items we're seeing in the category. So to make sure that you end up in the basket, promotions are equally as important. Each pricing is very important. And of course, meal inspiration that Price and Gary and Mike talked about can very nicely be done online as well. Here you see some examples of pub night at home, Greek night at home, Mother's Day. So now all of a sudden we can start taking occasions and drive all the items where with one click, they're all in the basket. And of course, translating, as I mentioned, new and seasonal items, that is going to be a real big challenge online. How does an online shopper know that it's cherry season and that you have gorgeous cherries in the store? How do you make sure that all those seasonal powerhouses are bought online as much as they are in store? Some people say, yeah, online shopping is not for me. I like the fun in the store, or I just tried it, but the delivery was bad. The convenience isn't good. I like to smell and feel it. So Mike, I think that goes directly back to your, that's our strength against frozen. I think that's also the strength in terms of in-store shopping. So let's talk about this whole area a little bit. I imagine e-commerce blew up for all of you. So price, typically, takes a little while for people to A, start shopping online, B, start shopping more frequently, and C, add produce to the basket. What happened for your company during the pandemic?
Anne Marie, for us, we had about 20% of online purchases being produce pre-pandemic. When the pandemic hit, that jumped as high as 50% during the peak months. But it's leveled off to now we're about 30% of produce being bought online. Like you said, it's been hard to get outside the staples. Potatoes, onions, lettuce. Those are really the drivers on online sales. That's our take on it.
Yeah, and Mike, you mentioned impulse earlier. We saw that people tend to stick with the same basket. Do you think there is opportunity to create impulse online?
I think there is, and I think that's, the e-commerce, I think, scares everybody in produce because you lose, when you lose the in-person shopper, you lose the impulse sales sometimes. So it's scary a little bit, but I think we can get better at it. And I think so. If somebody buys an apple, does an orange pop up, or somebody buys a banana, does a kiwi pop up next to it? I think we could learn from other industries and how they've tackled e-commerce, and I think we can grow from that. Imagery, I think, is key, and new seasonal items popping up, or just, I think we almost have to attack it like we would a produce department. How do you get that consumer, if they're shopping with you and it's online, how do you recreate that? And I think it's possible.
So Gary, talk to us a little bit more about those new and seasonal items. How do we get eyes on those in the online environment?
I think as an industry, definitely to produce, creating excitement about seasonal items in and out, first of the season, has always been somewhat between the retailers a race. To the point, sometimes they want to be the first retailer to advertise first of the season item or local to that area. But definitely that's something that you can continue to do with your signage and the building of displays. And just briefly talk about something we talked about earlier today. I know everybody's familiar with, if you're with a group of people or if you're in an office and you talk about an item, maybe it's a shoe or a radio or something, a specific brand name, the next day or later on that day, you're starting on your social media, you start to see listings for that item. So maybe that's something we can do as a produce industry as we move forward. If first of the season items, that becomes something that pops up on people's phones. So yeah.
I like that a lot, and I think our earlier speaker talked about, at least one post about fruit and vegetables a day. I think that was wonderful advice. Price, if you had to look in your crystal ball, I know it's very fuzzy right now for all of us, but where do you see online sale going?
It's going to continue to grow, and I agree with Gary 100%. We get stuff on their phones. Like I'm seeing everything about Disney right now on my phone. So how do we create that with in the store with the produce? It's there.
And Mike, if you have to look at the onslaught of new customers, we saw there were more boomers getting engaged because they were not quite sure about the safety of being in store. Did you see at all a change in what people bought, and is that moving back, or is it pretty much still the staples?
The one thing that I think that happened during the pandemic with the growth of e-commerce is a lot of people learned to trust it a little bit. And so ours did, similar to Price, went from 20 to 50%. And while it's come down a little bit, it's still very, very strong. It's not gone back to pre-pandemic levels. So I think, people trust the process now a little bit more than they did before. And that's, once again, I think why we need to get better at it.
Yeah, I've always heard the magic number is 3. If you can get them to make 3 orders, then it's smooth sailing from there. Gary, last question on this before we go to the audience. Prior to the pandemic, certainly online was one of the growing formats, but we saw produce popping up everywhere in convenience stores, in vending machines, and drugstores. What do you think about the competitive landscape going forward? Is that going to continue, or you think we're going to see that centralized purchase a little bit more?
I think that will definitely continue. It's just something that, whenever something starts to pick up, everybody jumps onto that. Like Dollar General, for example, they initially reported that they were going to do 250 stores with fresh foods and consumables, which they reported that 70% of all their sales came from that. So they recently changed that from 250 to 400. So growth is there. They see it. I know other companies continue to see it. E-commerce, I see it really continuing to take its growth. And just basically, even with the consumers that have a frustration with online produce and vegetables, because we all know impulse buy, touch, feel, taste, It's all about trust. So I think as consumers begin to have more trust in these online e-commerce platforms, that they'll be more likely to trust these folks to do their order or complete their orders online.
Absolutely, I agree. All right, so last food for thought, and then we go to questions. If all is well, you all got a handout with a top 10, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. We talked through several of them. There's many other areas in the report that you'll see. We asked a lot about hydroponics this year. We talked about the preference for field grown versus hydroponic growing. We have lots and lots of suggestions on how we can do better in the department. Nutrition health, like I said, it's about the overall health halo. It's also about the specific claims. As Rick mentioned, here is the link one more time to the FMI website. Everybody here on site as SEPC attendees gets a 40% discount on the FMI website. Type in the code SEPC 4021. And that's valid until May 7th. If you have any questions or you want those performance reports or you're having issues, feel free to shoot myself an email or Rick an email, and we'll always be available. And Kristen, I'm going to hand it over to you for all the questions.
Sounds great. Let's give Anna Marie, Mike, Gary, and Price a round of applause. So we have tons of questions coming in from the virtual garden, so I'm going to kick it off with one of those. So the question is, what are you doing to bring produce alive online? For example, how do you encourage sales of different varieties of grapes? Most websites still just say green, red, black. Any suggestions on how to be more creative and interactive?
All right, don't look at all of each other.
I've already passed one, so we're not doing anything currently, but we are looking at that, as I kind of alluded to earlier. It's really with our imagery and with using pop-ups. I think it's what we're working with our online platform with right now is how to create those extra sales and how to create more product knowledge.
I like what Mike said earlier in the questionnaire, which and we might have mentioned it, or maybe we didn't. Different things, popping up when you're looking at different items, other suggested items. We see that a lot, just regular online shopping. So definitely something with that.
One thing we are doing is digital coupons on that piece to call out any seasonal or high flavor profile item.
And I think on my end, we talked a lot about meal occasions and how can we bring fruit and vegetables more into breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacking, beverages, smoothies, what have you. So I think oftentimes people, for instance, don't know that you can freeze grapes or freeze blueberries. So you are able to buy a bigger container and use it over time in different items. So I think just little tips. Also keep in mind, a lot of people do like produce tips. They do like hearing about the grower. And I think online we have so much more opportunity to link to different things. Where did it come from? What's the source? What's the story behind it? What are some recipes? What are some ideas? So I think we need to take full advantage of that and have some fun. I love the St. Patty's Day redo and just stuff like that. I think we're all ready for a laugh, and I think online is definitely a good platform for it too.
Absolutely. Do we have any questions from the audience here? Coming up.
I have two questions. First of all, Anne-Marie, how does IRI account for online sales in terms of trips? Is curbside pickup, the online shopping where they go in and do the shopping for you, and then just where a retailer delivers straight to the consumer, is that all the same as far as a trip?
No, it really depends on the retailer and who picks the order. So some of the dollars that are reported in the MULO, the multi-outlook channel, are actually click and collect if they were rung up in the store. Others are pure e-commerce. So they do have a way of breaking it out where they can see the shopper shopped, they rang it up or paid at the register. And then on the other hand, there is the e-commerce that was either picked by an Instacart or shipped, picked by the store and either delivered or picked up by the shopper, but not in the store themselves. So they do have a way of breaking it out, but there always are gray areas where, nobody can quite track those dollars, but they're seeing about a doubling of online dollars in terms of the produce department.
Second question, what kind of household is serving 19% of their desserts with vegetables?
It's, well, more vegetables, who knows? It's not my household, that's all I can say, but
First of all, I want to thank you all for being here and your input in this. It's very encouraging to listen to all your stories. But my question is plastic. During this session, we spoke about plastic in positive and negative ways. And I think we can all agree that prior to the pandemic that plastic was a taboo within our industry. I mean, we felt so much pressure to do away with as much plastic as we could. But then when the pandemic hit, it reversed. We were getting more requests for bagged apples and wrapped produce and bagged navels, and we expanded sections that we were cutting back. So my question is, what is your thoughts on plastic as we stand right now? Is it a good thing, or is it a taboo, or where do we make a stance now? Because again, it was taboo and now it's back. And we're kind of left like, do we keep expanding plastic? If we do, we'll eventually come back to bite us. What direction do we go with this? And I would really appreciate any thoughts that you have on that.
I've got some, I really like to be sustainable at home. It's a passion of mine to reduce my carbon footprint and to make sure I don't have as much waste as possible. And so my thought on that is that plastic right now, I think it's not a bad thing, but I think it has to be easily recyclable. And I can take the rocket apple that Shalon does, and their container that's in, it's got a high rate of recyclability. And so I think if you have the right container that's easily recyclable, I think it's a win, because the consumer does right now looking for some areas that are where other consumers can't touch it. And so I think if you attack it the right way, I think it's a win.
Great point.
Guys, any answers? I can give a quick answer. So yes, we did see in sales that, and it's kind of hard to do, but if you look at fixed weight, so, and that kind of indicate packaged versus random weight, it was fixed weight that drove nearly all the growth in fruits and vegetables. But also when you think back to that powerhouse top 10, anything that is bagged salads or mushrooms or berries, by definition, they tend to be packaged. So it's hard to say which is the chicken, which is the egg. Was it the items people bought, or did people buy them because they were packaged? The counter argument to that definitely is that people were speeding through the store a whole lot more, and they were buying bigger quantities. So having some apples in bags sitting at the ready to grab and put in the cart versus picking them over helps speed. So that certainly is a big argument. And then absolutely, Mike, especially early on, we did have people be concerned about other people having touched their apples or items. I would say that concern has diminished a little bit, but still, when you look in the open-ended comments, especially on the deli prepared side, but in produce as well, people just continue to talk about the visibility of safety measures. And I think all of us working in the industry, we know food safety is our absolute basic. Without food safety, we do not exist. But to a consumer, that was always a given. They did not think about it. and now they do. And so all of a sudden they want almost what I would call like food safety theater. They want to see us out there with wipes and with gloves and with masks and really keeping the food as safe as possible, but they want to see it. And that hasn't really gone away yet.
Question regarding, say, the current shopping habits. Traditionally, people stopped after work and on weekends. We went to shopping that was really spread out over the week. Where are we back to now in, say, the concentration in different times and weekend versus week versus where you were before? Then I'll ask the other question.
That is a good question.
I think price.
Gary, price?
That's a good question. And we did, when the pandemic hit, it flatlined. You're right, 7 days, about the same volume. We're just now starting to see our Sundays be our number one day again. Years ago, it was Saturday, Sunday took that day, and it's coming back for us.
I think it's still hard to get a good read exactly on what days and what times you'll have an influx of folks, but it's definitely a constant area because you got at home working, and you got kids that are either virtual learning or some that are starting to transition back to school. So it's pretty spread for us.
And I would say one of the biggest changes I'm still seeing is the very different shopping patterns surrounding holidays. So typically the week before the holiday has always been the biggest one, especially if you think about the Thanksgiving turkey and those big meals. And what we're actually seeing now is that the week before the holiday week is the big one, because people are trying to spread out the purchases, not be in store and have these, lines with 50 people. So I'd say some of the everyday patterns have normalized a little bit. Of course, we all had those first responder hours, senior hours, etc. That seems to have eased off a little bit, but the holiday patterns are still very, very different.
Oh, I'm going to go ahead and pull another one from the virtual garden here. How have labor constraints affected your go-to-market strategies at a store level and from a sourcing standpoint?
Couldn't really understand your question. Labor.
How have labor constraints in both processing plants and at a store level, how have they affected any go-to-market strategies or standpoints of how you source?
Yeah, Mike touched on it earlier. I mean, like you said, help was extremely tight during the beginning of the pandemic. It's one touch for us. Whatever suppliers can bring to us, where it's just you take it and you put it on the shelf and it's retail ready, that's definitely something we're looking at. As labor continues to be a challenge, for sure.
I think it was a challenge across the industry. Even if you look at plant, packing facilities and stuff had some challenges there. So, I mean, I'm not sure if we've actually come to a real good strategy on how to combat that, but I mean, it has been an issue, and I think it's something we're all probably working towards to overcome.
Yeah, I really think that it was an industry-wide issue because to your point, we went from certain factories and plants where folks were able to work in the fields 2 feet from each other, then they had to be 6 feet. And each one of these groups in industry had their own regulation and guidelines to go by. So I think it was, we probably have a whole nother panel discussion just on the labor and the challenges there, but it definitely was a challenge.
I'm going to go ahead and pull one more here from the virtual garden before we go to our live audience again. Have you seen more of an importance on using high graphic display bins in an effort to get more items that are not on the shopping list into the shopping cart?
Is that a Harold question? Just curious. No.
It doesn't have his name next to it, so.
We do, absolutely. We got Envy Apple's coming. We got the POS to support it. It's hard to sell an Envy Apple unless you're out there telling the story, your produce manager supporting it, your consumers picking it up. I think that's key when you start getting off the meat and potatoes.
I think with the high graphic bins and displays, it talks to what we mentioned earlier, being first in the season, local to your area, anything that you can do to draw attention to, whether it's a health benefit or just a particular variety of something new, will increase and draw sales.
I haven't thought about it a whole lot, but it's a great question, and I think it is an opportunity to use those high graphic bins to talk about the health benefits and nutrition.
And I think the slide very early on that showed seafood growing, meat growing, really we have to win together in 2021 because we're all going up against enormous spikes. And so the idea of secondary displays, cross-merchandising displays, whether it's actual product or signage or online or meal ideation, whatever it is, I think winning together is our best, our bet going to create new pockets of growth.
As a state marketing agency, I'm always curious to know how we can be reactive to, especially the online marketing. It's easier to market in the store as what's local, but how are you working to identify what products are locally sourced on your online platforms as well?
I can give you an example of what we're doing. In about a week, North Carolina strawberries will be a primary item that's will be local to North Carolina, but we're kind of like starting a cross-merchandising program with the other departments and just drawing attention and then just letting them know, hey, coming soon, different ideas that you're putting in your head, just to know that so consumers will be looking for that particular item as it comes up. And then also, again, once it starts, across all departments, utilizing that local strawberry in all departments.
Yeah, we're currently using Oklahoma grown sticker on anything grown in Oklahoma, and that same logo is out there on our Instacart for consumers to see.
We use the Arkansas grown, and not that Arkansas is better than Oklahoma, but ours is really nice. And but I do think that's something where we have to improve on in online or e-commerce. I think we have to improve on the local sale. I think it's just another one of the layers that we can improve on.
My question is about food safety, and any data was available that shows how much produce lost to other departments because those departments were perceived safer by the consumer, and what can we do to preach safety to get those customers back to produce?
I guess I'll go first here. So very early on in the pandemic, I actually teamed up with the American Frozen Food Institute, and one of the fastest rising categories in frozen was fruit and vegetables. And we asked people that bought more or had never bought fruit and vegetables frozen before why that was. Their main reason was shelf life. They said, I'm in store less. But in the top 5 definitely was that they felt it was safer. And it was not necessarily the supply chain issue, but it was the idea of having people in the store who squeeze every avocado until they have the one that they like best. So it was really the behavior of the other consumers that drove that. So extrapolate that out, and I would say that some of the solutions our industry has come up with in terms of having items available in bags or in packages that are not touched, hand sanitizers, even just having people around who are constantly cleaning, etc. But I do think the produce industry has done an absolutely amazing job in not only maintaining but building that trust. And I would say for all of you that have websites, with imagery on there right now, make sure that you have all that updated with people with masks, really post what all you're doing. Again, as an industry, we've always done this. This is the basic of what we do. But to be very overt to it, to the public, especially older consumers seem to be concerned about this. So I would not necessarily believe that we have eroded any trust, but I absolutely believe it needs to be a continued and very visible priority of our industry.
Going back to another one of our virtual garden questions is, as food service begins to open on a bigger scale, do we anticipate a notable drop in produce? Do you think this will be temporary?
I think touched on that earlier. I think you have a lot of new cooks and new folks to the kitchen, even with the restaurants opening back up. Sure, there's going to be some fall off, but I still think that there's going to be folks that enjoy cooking now and can save $1 and say, hey, we can do this at home now. And so I still think there will probably be some fall off, but I think that's a category that still grow from where it was based. I think it'll still be continual growth.
I agree with that. I've seen some data that says only 60% of people by July will be comfortable in a restaurant, and even by next October, like 80%. You're still talking about 20% of people that aren't comfortable eating in a restaurant. And we all know in this room before the pandemic, a 1% sales increase was a big deal. So I think there's still, if you talk 20% of the population still cooking at home more, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. And I would say the concept I look at a lot, I call it consumer mobility, and that's kind of a fancy term for saying how much are we as a nation moving around, right? Are we going to school? Are we going to work? Are we going out to dinner? Are we going to sporting events? What have you? We see that mobility coming back, and that's something you can very easily track. So look at things like gasoline sales. Apple always puts stats out on how much people are driving and walking and biking around. It's things like open table reservations, and this week was actually the first week where open table reservations were back to pre-pandemic levels. So we're certainly seeing that mobility come back. With it, some of that dollar will move back to food service, I'm sure. But at the same time, Gary, I agree with you. We've figured out that, hey, we can actually slap a meal together in 10 minutes if we have to, which before we didn't think so and we would eat out. Or, hey, look at how much money I saved cooking at home versus eating out. And some of those lessons, I believe, will absolutely stick around. Will some of the people be ready to go to restaurants and have somebody else do the cooking? Absolutely. But I do believe that just the knowledge and the affinity we've built up is going to benefit us for years, if not generations to come.
Wrap it up. Okay. Let's go back to the online catalog experience. And I will put out a controversial proposition here that the fresh merchants are the probably least qualified guys to set up that catalog. Your center store guys are probably the most like, because the catalog is most like the can stacker square box world over there. In your organizations, how much, say, coordination is there between the in-store merchandising people and the online merchandising people, and how do you guys, or is there a day that, you know what, there's going to be an in-store merchandising staff and a separate online merchandising staff?
That's a good question. As far as separation, yeah, there are folks that do a better job at certain things. I think Center Store for online purchasing will continue to be the lead driver, but for the fresh, you just got to focus on what brings customers into your store. So if you have a certain theme or something that highlights something that you do special that nobody else does, maybe you interlay that with your Center Store folks. But it definitely be a challenge to have the same kind of results from Center Store than from the fresh department. But as far as separation, we probably could just need to lean on each other and see, what you can do that's similar to what Center Store is doing.
Being a smaller company, we're actually, even though we use a third party to do our e-commerce or e-shopping, we're still very, very connected in that, and it's been very easy. I mean, my sister-in-law works there at the company. She's highly involved in it. So I mean, we have a lot of good discussions over it, a lot of good strategies, and for us, I think moving forward, it's going to be very, very easy for us as an organization to tackle that.
I'm in the same boat as Mike, very small company. My office is right across from the marketing director who heads all that for us, and it's mainly just proofing the verbiage and things like that, making sure that's right when it goes out there.
And I actually agree with your premise, because I think we can learn a lot from Center Store, because if you think about all the claims that they've had on their boxes and on their products for so long, the stories that they tell on their packaging, the connectivity between items, the end caps and everything else, they've really learned to merchandise in the years that there was a lot of pressure on Center Store Mike, you talked about all those, the bottles and the people drinking their vitamins. I mean, if you look at the messaging that some of those produce-based drinks used, it's, you know, we can learn a lot from that. At the same time, I would say, as it relates to the produce category, I think there's only the produce guy that can bring that kind of love and just absolute passion for the category. So I think it's almost a combination of our knowledge and passion with the expertise of how to leverage packaging and claims and everything else from the center store. That is the winning formula.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. Unfortunately, we had lots more questions from the virtual garden that we're not be able to get to today. I did want to highlight once again, fmi.org/store with the discount code for SEPC attendees. Let's go ahead and give our crew another round of applause here. Thanks so much for joining us today, everybody. Take care.